Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for the AMSL Diabetes Sports and Exercise webinar. My name is Juliette Healy. I am a Territory Manager from AMSL Diabetes. And as an exercise physiologist, I'm incredibly excited about the session that we have planned for you today. Now, whilst we wait for a few more people to join us, we would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping. We can see from your answers to the registration that we have a really wide audience today. We have netballers, soccer players, long distance runners, cyclists, ocean swimmers, and our presenters today will do their absolute best to cover an enormous amount of content. But if you do have any questions throughout the session, please direct them to the Q&A on the bottom panel. And our moderators are working hard behind the scenes to address these questions when possible. Please note, there is no need to record today as we are recording the event and we can send it out at a later date. If you do accidentally bump yourself off at any point, please rejoin at any time using the link sent in the initial email. Now, we have a fantastic session planned for you today all around the balancing act of type 1 diabetes and exercise. We have endocrinologist Dr. Grant Cracknell kicking us off this morning, and he's going to look at diabetes and exercise, the benefits, the physiology, and recommendations using different modalities. We'll have time for a quick tea and coffee break before we're joined by Samantha Oxingham, the head of our professional education unit. She's going to be looking at exercise and the T-Slim X2 insulin pump with Control-IQ technology. And then Sam and Dr. Cracknell are going to have a look at some really common exercise scenarios and how you might approach them. After our next tea and coffee break, we'll be joined by our wonderful Dexcom warriors. We have Lara McSpadden, professional basketballer. We have Emma Sue Greentree, professional boxer, and Liam Colhoun, an ultra marathon runner, with us today. Now, please note that the information presented by Dr. Grant Cracknell today is based on his own expertise and is intended for educational purposes only. You all have your own unique needs when it comes to exercise and managing diabetes. So for advice tailored to your individual needs, please consult your healthcare team. Now, we'd love to get to know a bit more about you today before we start. So I'm just going to start a quick poll just to understand who we have in the audience today. So we'd love to hear from you, and I'll give you a little bit of time to start answering these questions. What is your sports or exercise goal this year? What is it that you're hoping to achieve? Do you want to sign up for your first local park run and run 5Ks? Do you want to do a marathon? Are you hoping just to get into the gym and start doing strength training? What is it that you're motivated to do when it comes to sports and exercise this year? We'd then love to know, what are you using for your current insulin delivery method? Are you using twice daily insulin? Are you using different types of insulin and multiple daily injections and calculating with a bolus calculator? Are you on insulin pump therapy? Or if you're simply a healthcare professional joining us today, please select none. We'd then also like to know, what current technology are you using to help manage your diabetes? Are you using Dexcom or are you using a different continuous glucose monitor? Are you using the Dexcom with the T-Slim with Control-IQ technology, so what we call a hybrid closed-loop system? Or are you using a different CGM and automated pump? Or are you using predictive low glucose suspend technology? Or if you are a healthcare professional, please select none. So we've had about 50 of you answer. We'll just wait another 30 seconds or so for you to get your answers in so we can get to know who we have with us today. And then in few more 30 seconds, we'll end this poll, and then Sam's going to jump on and share some of those results with us. So I can see we're 60% there. Almost there. Thanks everyone for responding so far. Got another 10 seconds. If you want to get your answers in. And see, we've still got a few more people answering. I think we've hit 70. All right, I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results. And Sam, if you want to jump on and share what we've got.
Thanks, Juliet. Let's share these results so you can see them too. I'm just jumping in so I can see some of these results on view details. Just while that's opening for me, I'm going to... Good old Zoom asking me to sign in. So we'll just jump to the second question. I can see there's lots of goals there. We'll get to some of those. And if I can't get to them just now, I'll get to some of those before I chat as well. So I'll bring that into my section. So we can see, just like Julia said, we've got such a wide array of people and where you've come from, which is really great. This is what this webinar has always been about. This is a very long running event for us here at AMSL. We've been doing this for more than 12 years now. So it's so great that every year we can offer something to, no matter where you've come from or where you're at in your exercise journey. So we've got about 18% of people on MDI or multiple daily injections, and maybe things like Daphne. We've got the majority of people using insulin pump therapy, almost 65%. And current tech, 65% of you who answered are using Dexcom. We've got a few using different brands as well. We've got 25% of you using t:slim with Control-IQ technology. And again, a few other on different brands as well. And perhaps you're not using any tech at all. So today, maybe you might learn a little bit about that as well. So we've got 17% of people. So a really nice array of people. Thank you for giving us a little bit of information about you. It might help you see too that we'll hopefully cover off all of these things here today. And we look forward to spending the next couple of hours with you. So with that, I'm going to pass it back, Juliet.
Thanks, Sam. All right, so we will jump in and get started. So we're really fortunate to be joined by Dr. Grant Cracknell today. This isn't his first time that he's been involved in our sports and exercise sessions. Dr. Grant Cracknell is a private practice endocrinologist at Spring Hill Endocrinology and a VMP endocrinologist at St. Andrew's War Memorial Hospital in Brisbane. He has a focus on general endocrinology with a special interest in type 1 diabetes and insulin pumps. He's a keen cyclist and bushwalker. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Dr. Cracknell. I'll hand over to you now.
Great. Good morning, Juliet, and good morning to all the people out there who are listening. Thank you to AML for putting these on. It's, as you said, not the first time I've been involved, and it's always a pleasure to talk about this because I know from all the questions that I saw that people had posted that they want answered from this seminar, that you're all out there trying to exercise, trying to make your diabetes fit in with your exercise. And hopefully what I'm going to share today will give you some background as to what your body's doing, give you some insights into why your blood glucose levels do what they do, and therefore hopefully allow you to be able to fit your diabetes in with your exercise. As I said, I'll be talking generalities today. We'll be talking a few more specifics later on with Sam Oxenham when we start looking at how to manage things briefly. So we've got about 45 minutes to run through a little bit what happens with your body as you're exercising. And I just need to make sure that I share that. There you go. So Juliet, is that on the screen? Can you see that okay? Looks like that's
working. Yes, I can, Grant. Okay. That's great.
Yeah,
Thank
great.
you.
All right. So I suppose there are lots of reasons why people are exercising, and you might have just finished exercising this morning before you came into the session, or you might have up some exercise planned this afternoon, and that's ideal because you'll have thought about what's happened to your sugar levels while you're exercising. And as you know, there are lots of benefits to exercise. It's beautiful and sunny here in Queensland today, although it's not been all that time all the time. It's social. Lots of the time we go and do exercise and then have a coffee afterwards, or it's a team sport situation. So there's fitness, there's social outings, and then there's also the mental health as well. And so what I'm going to do today is try and cover off some of the physiological aspects of what happens in your body and why you see the changes in your sugar levels that you do. All right, probably cover off on that. All right, there are also great reasons to be active from a perspective, and there's some good clinical data that indicates that if you're a person with type 1 diabetes who has an HbA1c of 7.2% and you exercise, that your risk of long-term complications are lower than a person who doesn't exercise with type 1 diabetes who has an HbA1c of 7.2%. So there seems to be some additional benefits of exercise on top of the social fitness and mental health aspects we talked a little bit about before. Exercise also has other benefits. It's great for lowering your blood pressure, for keeping your weight under control. It decreases how much insulin you need, and obviously good for your bones and thinking about osteoporosis in the years to come. All right, what's currently recommended for everyone, and this is not just for people with type 1 diabetes or diabetes, we all should be trying to aim for about 150 minutes of exercise per week, moderately vigorous, so that's where you're puffing. That might be a more vigorous walk or doing some heavy gardening, or if you're a quite intense exerciser, like a high intensity interval training or F45 classes, 75 minutes per week of that should be good as well, and no more than 2 inactive days in a row. So it'll be helpful, but it's less helpful if you go out there and do 75 minutes of absolutely knock your socks off exercise, and then for the other 6 days of the week you're inactive. It's probably not going to do much for your fitness, and you will be sore and tired afterwards. So yeah, try and spread it out through the week. All right, today we're going to talk about 2 different types of exercises, and I've briefly sort of separated those into aerobic and anaerobic, and I'll try and describe what those 2 are. But today I'm going to keep referring to aerobic exercise and to anaerobic exercise because our body responds differently to these 2 situations. So for aerobic exercise, you'll be thinking, yeah, I can do this, and yeah, I'll probably stop when I'm ready to. Probably when I get tired, but I'm not going to absolutely hit the wall and just can't keep going. This might be something like slower walking, walking on the flat, gentle swimming, riding a bike with children, a family ride, non-competitive long-distance swimming, stand-up paddle boarding, and the non-sport activities of things like shopping, ironing, housework, and gardening. So typically you can do these things for ages. You're not going to sit there and have to catch your breath because you're so short of breath doing them. However, anaerobic exercise is quite the opposite. This is where I almost feel like I can't keep going with this. Yeah, I'm really puffing heavily, and this might be a running race, a sprint, a really quick 50-minute swim. If you're on your bike going up a hill or doing some sprints, F45 classes, high intensity exercise, all those things we talked about before. So this is the type of exercise where you think, my goodness, I wish I could give up, but I don't have to. And at some point in time, I'm going to hit the wall and I can't keep going. So I've put nice little icons in here to make it a little bit easier to see. So the heart is the aerobic exercise, and the POW has nothing to do with Batman and Robin. It's the obviously intensity with the anaerobic exercise. All right, so this is the general picture of what happens when we're exercising. Here's a swimmer, here's a walker walking along, and whilst they're exercising, they're generating heat, which is why you start sweating, obviously. You're using oxygen and glucose to generate energy. And you also, depending on the intensity, if it's a low intensity exercise, you also use fat, and you break down fat into ketones. Ketones then are used as energy. And you'll probably be aware of things called ketones if you have type 1 diabetes, because you think, oh, they're terrible. They are actually a fuel source, and it's when they get really high and uncontrolled that you can run into this problem called diabetic ketoacidosis. But going out for your gentle walk, going for your 1 hour gentle bike ride, is that your body will be likely using fat as a fuel source, breaking that down into ketones, and your muscles use that for energy like it is with glucose, putting that together with oxygen, and then generating some physical activity for you. All right, insulin happens to inhibit 2 of these processes in here. So insulin inhibits the use of glucose. It's a storing hormone. So what it's wanting to do is to tell the body to store glucose, not to liberate glucose, and it's also inhibiting the breakdown of fats into ketone bodies. And so as I went out for my bike ride this morning with no brekkie in my tummy, my body was trying to liberate glucose And so my pancreas, as my glucose level was nice and low and my muscles were using glucose, is my pancreas would have really started to turn down the insulin because it's trying to allow the glucose to be liberated from glycogen, and it's trying to break down fats into ketones. So exercise in most situations is a low insulin state, and that is that in your bloodstream, you should have very low levels of insulin. All right, so that inhibits. So aerobic exercise, we're going to talk about that now. So in aerobic exercise, because your use of glucose is at a relatively slow rate, your body thinks, okay, great, I can actually generate some glucose and make sure that you have enough glucose. I can break down fat, make sure there's enough ketone bodies to make sure that Grant has enough energy in his muscles to be able to keep riding his bike. And so the body doesn't get too stressed by that. It just goes through the process of trying to break down glycogen into glucose and to break down fat into ketone bodies. I'm starting to puff a little bit more, so I'm using more oxygen and I'm using more glucose. And it's really important to point out that your muscles can take up glucose without insulin. So you do not need insulin for your muscles to take up glucose. And in a way, what your body does is says, right, I definitely don't want any insulin around while I'm exercising, or very little, because the muscles, the heart and the brain can all take up glucose without insulin. And so I don't want any of the other organs to be storing glucose. I want all the glucose to be going to the muscles, to the heart, and to the brain. And that way you can swim, you can run. Yeah. And so you'll be breaking down some fat, breaking down some glycogen into glucose, and your body will be using a lot more oxygen than it would be at rest. As I said before, if you've got insulin on board, then there's a little bit of extra insulin-stimulated glucose uptake, but that's not necessary for your muscles. But the extra insulin's in your bloodstream will be inhibiting the breakdown of fats, and that makes it harder to exercise over long term. And it's also going to be inhibiting the breakdown of glycogen into glucose. And so this is why you sometimes have low sugar levels if you've got insulin on board while you're doing this type of exercise. All right, and this should be anaerobic exercise. No, apologies, there's still aerobic exercise in here. So what you see on the right-hand side in this picture is this person on rollerblades or running. And typically what happens to the glucose levels is it drops because your muscles are using glucose. And even if you've still got some insulin, no insulin in your system, your body's going to be using that glucose and your glucose level is going to start to drop. And so you want to be starting to reduce your insulin. All right, we're now going to talk about anaerobic exercise, which is that type of exercise where at some point in time you want to give up because it's really hard. Yep. So this might be things like weight training, boot camp, body attack classes, hard efforts when you're running, hard efforts on your bike. It could be boxing is certainly a very high intensity activity. All those types of things can do it. And basketball as well counts into this because it's one of those really explosive sports where you're sprinting, running, jumping, doing all those types of things. And your body realizes that you're using so much glucose that it just cannot keep up with breaking down glycogen into glucose to keep your energy stores up. And so what it has to do is really liberate a whole lot of glucose. Yep. So in anaerobic exercise, your swimmer's running faster, this girl is running along faster. Is you're still using oxygen and using bucket loads more glucose, you're starting to generate a lot more heat and you're starting to get really puffed. And so again, there'll be an additional intake of of glucose from your muscles with the help of insulin. But what happens in this situation in here is that your body starts releasing noradrenaline in particular, and as well as growth hormone and cortisol. Now, they have some really important roles to play with your glucose level and with your metabolism. Noradrenaline makes your body insulin resistant. And so the insulin that's still in your system trying to store glucose away, your body says, don't store glucose. Don't listen to the insulin. All that glucose has got to go to the muscles because the muscles are using huge amounts of glucose. Growth hormone will also break down glycogen into glucose and help break down fats into ketone bodies. And so will cortisol as well, make you insulin resistant and cause some liberation of glucose as well. So your body really realizes that it needs lots of energy and it just can't make it in the liver. It's got to be able to release all this stored glucose that you've got as glycogen. And so often what you see in this situation in here is as the noradrenaline kicks in and you become insulin resistant and you release a whole lot of glucose, is that your glucose levels can go up. You know, they can go up a little bit or they can go up a lot. And we'll talk a little bit about it later on, but the time of the day makes a difference too. So if you've got a bit of a rising glucose level when you wake up in the morning and then you go and do a high intensity session, you might see your glucose levels rise more. And I can see that from the questions that people posted before today's seminar, that people are saying, how come my sugar level goes up when I exercise? Well, hopefully this explains it to you. All right, what about mixed exercise? And so we've got in here things like basketball, netball, soccer, where it could be a sprint and then a stand, etc. And this can happen with weight training sessions as well, as you get periods where your body is in aerobic and then it will go into anaerobic, aerobic and anaerobic. And so what you often see is a bit of a moderation of the glucose. Sometimes it'll go up, sometimes it'll go down, but it generally stays more steady for a period of time. And there is a time limit to that we'll talk about shortly. But mixed exercise, you'll often see sugar levels stay more relatively stable. And for those of you who go and do weight training, you might have seen this in weight training sessions, is that when you're pushing your weights where you're doing a whole lot of reps and then you rest and then you're into your next set of a whole lot of reps, is that your sugar levels actually staying relatively stable. What I'm going to briefly talk a little bit about now is that there can be a huge difference between match day and competition. So if you're out there training for AFL, rugby, football, netball, basketball, there's a huge difference in what happens on match day compared to your training. And often you'll see, as you know, if it's a big match, you'll have butterflies in your stomach, you feel a bit nervous. If you're sitting on your bike at the start line waiting to start your bike race, your tummy is churning, you've often been to the toilet a few times, there's adrenaline happening in your system. And before you even exercise, you can see your glucose levels starting to rise. And so at training days with soccer, you might see your sugar levels actually tend to drop. Whereas on match day, you might see in that particularly first half, the first part of the first half, your sugar level might actually be skyrocketing on match day. Yeah. All right. So in this situation, what you probably want to do is try and avoid having lots of carbohydrates within 3 hours of a match, because you've got a glucose rise from your meal coming through. Plus, you've also got all these nerves making you insulin resistant, so your bolus doesn't work. And your sugar level, you start the match with a sugar level of 15 or 16, and you think, oh my goodness, you know, where am I going to go from here? And then, of course, you know, retrospectively, is in that first part of the match, your sugar levels get even higher. And some people feel quite thirsty and yucky as they exercise and try and perform with high sugar levels. So for this type of situation on a match day, you might want to actually consider having a more protein-based meal more than 3 hours before you exercise, so that there's not a lot of protein sitting in your stomach when you're trying to exercise, but you've got some energy coming through your system that's not caused a glucose rise. Another option that's worth considering is one of these micro boluses. So if you know your sugar, if you know if your sugar level rises by 5 millimoles per litre when you do a particular activity and it tends to make you feel pretty lousy, is that you can put in a small little bolus, and you know, let's say your normal insulin sensitivity factor would say, right, you need to put in 2 units of insulin to counter that 5 millimole rise. I would suggest putting in half to 1 unit of insulin just to help drop the glucose level and stop it rising without trying to give yourself a whole amount of insulin, because remember, your exercise might only last an hour or so and your insulin lasts 3 hours. So you don't want a lot of insulin coming through after you finish training. All right, the order that you do exercise matters. And so this was a clinical study where they got to do, people to do anaerobic exercise and then aerobic versus the opposite of doing aerobic first and then anaerobic. And you can see in this situation in here, the people who did the anaerobic exercise first, and this was a 45-minute session, is their sugar levels remained relatively stable throughout their 45-minute exercise. Then they went on and hopped on the treadmill and started doing a whole lot of exercise, and then you can see their glucose levels started to drop. Yeah. And so this strategy might be a really good strategy if you've got a glucose level going to the gym, for instance, because this is typical for, okay, I'm going to do some weights and then hop on a treadmill or the bike, or I'm going to hop on the bike and then do my weights afterwards. If you're going in with a blood sugar level of 6 before you go to the gym, then it would be ideal for you to do your weights first before you do your cardiac exercise, because you're going to have a much more stable glucose level to begin with. If you've got a blood glucose level of 6 and you hop on a bike, you're probably going to have a hypo while you're exercising. and vice versa. If you've got a blood sugar level of 14 or 15 before you start exercising, don't go and do your weights first. Hop on a bike and get your sugar level down, and then you can do your weights afterwards. Yeah. But you can see in here that if you do your aerobic exercise first, which is using glucose, when you do your high intensity exercise, the glucose level actually still rises. So you've still got that effect of the noradrenaline liberating glucose and causing a bit of insulin resistance. Yep. So you haven't fully exhausted your glucose supplies. Yep. And then in recovery, in this group of people in here, you can see once they'd finished both lots of exercise, in both groups, their glucose levels rose slightly throughout, although not greatly statistically significant. The ones who in fact did the the gym session second had a bit more of a rise in their glucose level after they'd finished. And you might see that yourself when you come out of the gym, you can start to see glucose levels going up. All right, so what we're going to talk a little bit now is about longer in duration exercise. So more than the 45 minutes, more than the hour, more than the hour and a half, what happens in there? And with aerobic exercise, as we said, that you're using glucose and you've got some stored glucose in there, but if you keep going, it's just going to continue to go lower. If you do mixed exercise and you play two tennis is an ideal one, where you play a couple of matches that day, is that with tennis, it's a similar sort of thing. You're sprinting, stopping, sprinting, stopping, sprinting, stopping. Maybe in the first set, your glucose levels stay stable, but by the time you're into the second and third set, your glucose levels are starting to drop. And certainly if you did a weight session and then a high intensity interval training session afterwards, apart from feeling awful and probably feeling like you want to vomit, you'll also find that your glucose levels will start to drop as well. And what's happening in here is that your body can liberate glucose up to around about 45 minutes worth, and then it's used all its glycogen stores, and there's really nothing left to be able to liberate to try and keep your glucose levels up. Your muscles keep using glucose, and so even in that situation of high intensity exercise, your glucose levels will start to drop. Yeah, and so this becomes important if you're doing a marathon, if you're doing a bike race or anything like that, which might be in the order of 2.5 hours, is you're going to start to see your glucose levels drop after that 45-minute period. All right, I made a little suggestion in here, but we can talk about that later on. Yeah, we'll cover that shortly. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about fueling for exercise. And a lot of people ask specifically, what type of fuel should I put in for my exercise? Should I eat before I go? How often should I eat? So I'm going to cover off some of the general recommendations that have been given to people with type 1 diabetes to manage this. And I'm going to split this into this column in here, which is for people without diabetes, just so that you can see what your body needs. And then we'll talk about what to do if you're on a pump and what to do if you're on injections. Because with a pump, you can turn down your insulin, like I do when I go for a bike ride. My pancreas will turn down the insulin. On a pump, you can also turn down your insulin. If you're on multiple daily injections, you can't change your basal insulin. Once you put your basal insulin the night before or in the morning, you can't change how much of that basal insulin comes through. So what you've got to do now is to make the food fit in with your insulin rather than make your insulin fit into your food, but it's still very possible. All right. So you're going out for a bike ride this morning. I keep talking about bikes. That's my penchant, so sorry to talk about that. But I'm going out for a 30-minute bike ride. Doesn't matter how intense it is. I'm not going to need any food for a half-hour bike ride. I'm going to be perfectly fine. I'm not going to bonk. I'm going to have plenty of energy to be able to do that. If I go for a slightly longer ride in here of up to an hour, I'm going to start to need a small amount of carbohydrates, because in that end of the ride, I'm going to start to run out of glycogen. And so I might need to put in a little bit more glucose for my ride. Certainly, if I'm going to be going for a 2.5, 3-hour ride, I'm going to start to need to put in around about 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour. And I certainly do that too. If I'm going for a long ride, after about an hour on the bike, I start putting in around about 20 grams of carbohydrates every half hour to make sure that I'm getting enough energy for a longer session. And if you're doing a really long session in here, you're definitely going to need to be able to get that in, and you're going to need to spread that over a long period of time. And you need to think about the carbohydrates that you can keep getting in without making you feel sick in the tummy. Something that's absorbed really quickly. And sometimes combinations of fructose and glucose can be really helpful rather than just straight glucose or straight fructose. So you need to think about what sort of foods that you need, and you sometimes get hungry on long sessions as well. And so getting some more solid food in rather than just glucose gels, etc., can be really helpful. All right, so what happens if you have a pump? How do you manage that? Well, if you got a pump on board, and this is sort of low insulin conditions, so this is a pump in exercise mode in here. If your blood glucose is less than 5 millimoles per liter, yeah, you can still go and exercise. And if you're going to do an exercise which you know is really going to put your sugar levels up, you probably don't need to have anything to eat at all. But if you're sitting down at 3.7, 4 millimoles per liter, you probably want to have a small amount of carbohydrates. And depending on your insulin sensitivity, maybe 10 to 20 grams is going to be enough to get your glucose level up, just to keep you in safe zone as you head off to exercise. But again, if you're a person who you know your sugar level is going to rise, maybe you don't need to do that if your sugar level is sitting at 4.7. All right, if you're going to do low to moderate intensity exercise in here, you've turned your pump down prior to your exercise, and we'll talk about that shortly. But you're probably going to need to be putting around about 10 to 15 grams per hour of glucose level in, glucose in, even for an hour of exercise. And it's because you're still going to be churning through some carbohydrates, just like someone who doesn't have diabetes. So you've turned your insulin down, you're still going to need a little bit of energy in here. If it's high intensity exercise, as we said, you're probably not going to need to put any carbohydrates in up until around about 45 minutes to an hour. And then after that, you might need to start to put in 10 to 20 grams of carbs every half hour or so. If you're doing longer duration, as we said, your glucose levels are going to start to drop, even if it is high intensity exercise. And so you're going to need to start to put in 30 to 6 grams of carbohydrates per hour. And certainly for longer ones as well, follow nutrition. If you're a person who's doing marathons and ultra marathons, like we'll hear from Liam shortly, is that you're really going to need to think about your nutrition. And some people go off and see a dietitian to try and get some guidance about that. And no doubt, if you're going to go and do a marathon or ultra marathon, you would have practiced doing a 20, 30 kilometer run already, and you'll know what happens to your sugar levels. You know what you need to use to fuel your body. But anyway, you're going to need around about 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour. And you can either follow that, or if you're smaller, usually around about 0.5 gram per kilogram per hour. So if you're 40 kilograms in weight, you're probably going to need around about 20 grams per hour of glucose. What happens if you don't have a pump? I'm just going to move that to the other side there so I can see this. What happens if you don't have a pump and you're under basal insulin that you've done as an injection? Then you're going to need to think differently. So because you can't turn your insulin down, and even if you're going for exercise for 30 minutes, you're probably going to need to put some carbohydrates in, probably a little bit more than you would need to do if you're on a pump or if you didn't have diabetes. And this is just because you've got this basal insulin that's trying to store glucose level away, and your muscles are saying, no, I'm trying to use it. If you're going for a longer exercise, again, you might need to put in some carbohydrates from around about 30 minutes onwards, about 15 to 30 grams. And you might need more carbohydrates for a longer duration exercise. 75 grams per hour may be needed because, again, your basal insulin is still trying to store your insulin away. And if you're doing super long exercise in here, again, see your dietitian, but you're going to need to think about maybe even having to reduce your basal insulin that day. If you're going for a 6-hour ultra marathon, you might need to reduce your basal insulin so you've got less basal insulin running in that situation, and you're going to need to fuel with both carbohydrates and some protein, and maybe something that's got some fat in there as well. All right, so it is very possible to manage your glucose level if you're on a pump, and if you are using multiple daily injections, very possible in either situation. After exercise, as you saw in that clinical study in there, your glucose might be stable, might rise a little bit, or in the hours afterwards, as your muscles now start to recover, what might happen is your glucose levels might start to drop. Yeah, your muscles have released a whole lot of stored glycogen. They've also been physically active. You've put them through a stress that wants them to get stronger and grow. And in that process, they're going to start to suck up glucose again. And it doesn't need glucose to restore the glycogen in the muscle after exercise. It happens if your glucose levels are higher. Yeah. So in this situation in here, lots of people find after sometimes initial rise in their glucose with the effect of noradrenaline is that their glucose levels over the next 4 hours or even for the next day are much lower than they normally would be. Oops, sorry, I just got to click on that. We talked about that. What exercise in the afternoon and evening can do. So if you're a person who comes home from work and then goes to a gym class, or you come home from work and go for a run, or you're riding on the way home from work, is that you might find that your basal insulin requirements overnight start to decrease. And so if you're on multiple daily injections, or if you're on a pump that doesn't have automated hybrid closed loop mode, is you're going to need to reduce your basal insulin overnight by around about 10%. All right, so far we've covered exercise is a good thing. There is a difference between anaerobic and aerobic exercise, and understanding these two different phenomenons and what happens. Anaerobic exercise causes your sugar levels to go up initially. Aerobic exercise makes your glucose levels drop really quickly. And knowing that that there are those two different responses is really helpful to know and try and predict what your glucose levels are going to do, and therefore how much food should you eat, how much should you adjust your insulin by. And as I've pointed out, and I keep stressing, any exercise is absolutely possible with diabetes. And if you don't believe me, you can go to a website called runsweet.com, and it's a great resource. It's where athletes who have type 1 diabetes, who also exercise, have put up how they manage their insulin, how they manage their nutrition, how they manage their glucose levels through exercise. And it's a really useful resource that is very sport specific. So it's not just sports in general. It'll be for stand-up paddleboarders, it'll be for rowers, it'll be for ultra-marathoners, it'll be for cyclists. And so there are lots of different tabs in there. So it's a really useful resource. And these people have proven, as you have out there in the community, that you can go and exercise when you have type 1 diabetes. All right, living well with type 1 diabetes is really understanding that you are a normal person who also needs to keep their body healthy by exercising. And the only difference really is that you have an external pancreas. And what we're talking about all today is really about how to make your external pancreas, either your pens or your pump, fit in with what you want your body to do. So you need to eat well, manage your insulin well, stay active, follow your dreams, and to follow your dreams, you need to also get sleep. Sleep's really important too. But if you have a goal for your exercise, and it sounds like there are plenty of people out there with goals this year, is follow those dreams. And hopefully today will help give you a bit of information to make your glucose levels fit in with what you want to do. All right, I'm going to finish there.
Thanks so much, Grant. Such a fantastic session. I particularly loved the exercise order. I hadn't seen that before, so that's really interesting for people that are approaching the gym and doing their strength and then their cardio. That was really, really awesome to see, and definitely love the idea that absolutely anything is possible when it comes to your exercise and living with type 1. Now we're just going to have a really quick 5-minute jump up, stretch your legs, tea and coffee break, and then we'll come back. So it's 10:38 by my watch. Come back at 10:45 with a nice hot cup of tea or coffee, and we'll keep going on. Thanks, everybody. All right. I hope everybody has a nice hot cup of tea or hot coffee in front of them. It's with great pleasure that I announce our next speaker. We have Samantha Oxingham joining us, who is the National Clinical Education Manager for AMSL Diabetes. Sam is a credentialed diabetes educator and an accredited practicing dietitian with a background in acute care, community health, government, industry, and private practice. Sam's passion in diabetes technology stems from having lived with type 1 diabetes for over 38 years. Sam joined AMSL in 2010 and leads a national team who continually aim to inspire, inform, and empower people to positively impact a life with diabetes. And Sam's exercise of choice is to be out running with her dog. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Julia. It's so nice to be here with you all. I realise we've still got a couple more minutes, so just while people are probably grabbing their coffee, I wish I had another one myself. So while we wait for a few people, I realise there's been a few latecomers as well, and so I thought that might be a good chance for those of you who's jumped on a little bit late, we're up to our next section on all things exercise and automation. We are using our Q&A chat box today, and we've got quite a team behind the scenes who are happily answering those questions. So please, you're welcome to type any questions that you've got. Dr. Grant Cracknell has been very kind to say he'll try and get to a few of those as well. Now, we will have some time, hopefully a little bit at the end, for a bit of Q&A. We're running slightly ahead of time, so we might have time for a few more questions at the end. We'll see how we go. We did do some polls at the very beginning, and we asked what your sports and exercise goals were. So we've managed to get those up and running now. Zoom was playing some tricks on us, so we've got those. And I thought this might be nice for you to hear some of each of your goals, and they are wide and varied. And I really appreciate that some of you have put those responses in. So we've got some wonderful goals: better health, no particular goals, walking 10,000 steps a day, some more strength training. I can see a first High Rocks event. My brother is training for that. It's crazy. Well done. Really excited. Let us know how you go. Completing a half marathon. Impressive. What else have we got here? Getting back into windsurfing, starting weights, getting started, learning how to do it better with better glucose management, which is why you're here today. So thanks for coming. A bit more muscle mass, getting back to the gym and exercising frequently. I did see as well some ultra trail runs, some bike and mountain bike racing as well. Amazing goals. I'm hoping that today you're all going to learn how to manage those with your diabetes a little bit better, and we set you off on your way. It is only 5 days until the Olympics start, so I hope that you're setting up your treadmills and your exercise things in the lounge room, getting ready to exercise and get all enthused by the Olympics. Could be some late nights ahead. All right, with that, let's move on to the next section. So again, it is a pleasure to be with you today. Today, I'm going to be talking about the next frontier in exercise and diabetes, and we think that's exercise and automation. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about Tandem Diabetes Care Advanced Hybrid Closed Loop System. That's the t:slim with Control IQ technology. So first, a little bit about the tech first before we can kind of jump into talking about exercise strategies. So automation requires 3 technologies. So for those who are relatively new to diabetes, the first is an insulin pump. It is a small pager-like device. In the case of the t:slim, it is smaller than the size of a credit card and slimmer than a 5-cent coin. I can just see Lara McSpadden jump on. We're going to chat to Lara a little bit later today. Lara, just switch your camera off, and we're going to invite you in with a warrior chat in a little bit. Sit back and enjoy. And so the pump is filled with rapid-acting insulin and is programmed to deliver a tiny amount of rapid-acting insulin every 5 minutes. And that can be in increments as little as 1/1000th of a unit. It is programmed to automatically increase or decrease insulin at customized times to suit you, the individual. And in this way, it's designed to mimic a healthy functioning pancreas. And so the Tandem t:slim pump is updatable, and that means if you have an in-warranty pump, pumps have a warranty typically of 4 years. And if you have an in-warranty pump, then you are eligible for any updates that Tandem Diabetes Care sends through. It holds 300 units of rapid-acting insulin. It has a rechargeable battery that has a battery storage of up to 7 days, and has a platform that is designed with human factor engineering. What exactly is that? It means it's designed in a way that your mind expects it to operate. And all of that data is on one user-friendly touchscreen. So Tandem and Diabetes Care, Tandem and Dexcom formed a partnership now more than a decade ago to bring life-changing technology to people with diabetes. So the second piece of the puzzle is Dexcom continuous glucose monitoring, or Dexcom CGM. And so Dexcom is known for its superior accuracy, and accuracy is the very foundation of precise automation. So there are 0 fingerprints required for the system, and also for calibration that was typically used in the past to confirm a sensor's accuracy. There isn't any paracetamol or vitamin C interference either. So then we get to the most important bit when we start talking about automation, and that is the Control-IQ algorithm. And so this is actually embedded into the pump. Control-IQ has a predictive algorithm, and it actually uses Dexcom CGM to look 30 minutes into the future to determine how much it needs to increase or decrease by automatically to help keep your glucose levels in range. And that range is international standard of 3.9 to 10 millimoles. We know all too well that there are no 2 days the same with diabetes. And so the system isn't restricted by past behaviours or past glucose result. Excuse me, the best way to think about it is if we get in the car to drive, it's like we want to be making sure that we're looking forward when we're driving, not looking in the rearview mirror. So clinical guidelines, current clinical guidelines recommend that because of the improved diabetes control, both in the acute and the short and in the long term, as well as improvements in well-being, so things like reduction in missed days of work or school, better sleep, and most importantly, less burden in having to manage those glucose levels, that every person with type 1 diabetes should be at least offered. Of course, it is absolutely your choice, but you should be at least offered the choice to have an insulin pump with automation. So I've got a bit of a frog. Let me just have some water. Okie dokie. So moving on. Again, I think we say this often, but I think every person with type 1 diabetes frequently has to wait far too long for many things. With the t:slim, you are able to start the Control-IQ algorithm on day 1 of pump start as well. It really is as easy as connecting your Dexcom G6 CGM. We add in your weight and your total daily dose. The algorithm uses this information to get the algorithm started. We toggle it on by simply touching it on the screen there. As you can see, we toggle on the Control-IQ, and then it's active and it's starting to automatically increase or decrease insulin to help keep those levels in range right from that very first reading. Clinical studies show that time in range improvements can be seen within 24 hours, and they are sustained out to 12 months and longer. So let's learn a little bit more about the algorithm itself, and then we can learn more about the strategies that we recommend with the t:slim with Control-IQ for exercise. So this is a very pretty graph that shows you really the nuts and bolts of the Control-IQ algorithm. And if I put my little green box around this section here, so when your glucose is predicted 30 minutes in the future to be at 6.25 or less, the system will start to decrease your basal insulin. It'll start to decrease that insulin that is dripping in every 5 minutes. And again, it can decrease that in as little as 0.001 of an increment, or more if that is what is needed. When that glucose is predicted to go below 3.9, it will start to suspend your background insulin, and it does that temporarily. The best way to think about it is like having a dimmer on a light switch, and it starts to dim down the light, and then it will turn off the light temporarily if we need to suspend that insulin. Then in our middle section here, we can see glucose levels sitting roughly around the 5 mark or the low 6s. And if your glucose is predicted to be between 6.25 and 8.9, it will simply deliver what has been programmed into your pump at that point in time. Then when your glucose is predicted to go above 8.9, so it will start to increase that basal insulin. It's again like brightening up the light. So it starts to turn up the dimmer on your light switch. And then when that's not quite enough, whoops, if your glucose is predicted to go above 10, it then steps in and delivers another automatic correction. It's a little bit like if you've gone to deliver a correction yourself and it suggests that you need a little bit more insulin, it will deliver that automatically for you. So when the pump is adjusting that background insulin, it is essentially doing a correction every 5 minutes. But in addition, it does offer this stronger and true correction up to once an hour. So let's say you have a glucose level of 5, perhaps we've forgotten to bolus for our lunch, or perhaps maybe you've just undercounted your carbs a little bit and that glucose is predicted to go above 10. It will then deliver that automatic correction, helping to keep those levels in range. It's getting to it sooner than perhaps what you might even see. So you might be getting on with your day, you're not even aware that your glucose is rising, and it will start to deliver that automatic correction. And in fact, it can raise that basal or that background insulin and deliver that automatic correction at the same time. So for those of you who might be using MDI or using some pumping without automation, the difference between regular pumping or MDI correction might be that your calculator, perhaps you've got a bolus calculator on a meter, or perhaps you've got it on your pump without automation. It says that you've got enough insulin on board for your current glucose. And in this particular case on my screen, we've got a current glucose of 7.3. However, with automation, if that glucose is predicted to go above 10 in 30 minutes, in this case 12.6, the pump will then deliver that extra insulin, in this case 1.06 of a unit, getting ahead of that glucose and helping to keep it in range. So in addition to the standard Control-IQ algorithm, there are additional algorithms with Control-IQ that are dedicated for sleep and exercise for added control. So with sleep activity, it is designed to achieve a morning or a fasting glucose level of 6. And it can be scheduled to automatically turn off at night and turn off in the morning. Or it might even be the opposite if you're a shift worker. So you can set those times that it turns on and off, and you can schedule that for you so that you don't have to think about it. One less thing for you to remember. It doesn't offer any automatic corrections when sleep activity is on. And that's because we typically need these automatic corrections when we forget to bolus, or perhaps we've miscounted our carbs, or we've got activity or stress during the day. So it's also a safety measure. Instead, it starts to raise basal insulin when that glucose is predicted to go above 6.7 rather than 8.9. So it remains effective in helping to predict and prevent against both low and high glucose levels. It's also recommended that we set that for a minimum of 5 hours, and research shows an average time in range of around 90% in the early hours of the morning when it's utilised. One of the most common things that people tell us after they've started on Control-IQ is that they're finally getting a good night's sleep and waking in range every morning, setting them up for success for the rest of the day. We know that if you start in target, it's much easier to keep that going than being on the back foot. Either you've been low and you've had an ordinary night's sleep, or you're starting high and needing to try and fix that before the day's even started. And I'm sure you all know the benefits of a good night's sleep, even more so when we're exercising. It's an important recovery tool. Okie dokie. Where are we up to? Next. All right, so then there's an additional algorithm for exercise. I know that many of you experience and had asked us in all of your questions, and we thank you for sending those in. We read each and every one of them. Asked us how to prevent hypos during sport. And this exercise activities, is designed to do just that. It's designed to prevent the natural drop in glucose levels from aerobic activity. So to do this, it starts to reduce insulin when that glucose is predicted to be at or below 7.8 rather than 6.25 in the standard setting. And it will suspend when levels are predicted to be at 4.4 rather than 3.9. So if we start to minimize the insulin that is infused, then of course no insulin, and we see glucose levels start to rise. So it sort of raises the floor really on the target and starts to minimize that insulin sooner in order to keep that glucose level propped up. I like to think of exercise activity, though, as a multi-use tool. It has far more uses than the name would actually suggest. So anything that might be potentially causing those lower levels, it might be gardening, it might be labour, it might be just one of those low days. And this is something that you can quickly pop on at the touch of a button. And you can set the timer anywhere from 15 minutes to 8 hours, and then it will automatically turn on to the standard setting afterwards. So you don't have to think about it either. And as Grant has nicely identified, lows during exercise are really only one side of the coin, and I saw that in some of your questions as well. Anaerobic activities, so things like sprinting or weights, even competition where nerves and adrenaline are involved, these can actually cause those glucose levels to rise. And so for this reason, when we have exercise activity turned on, it still does offer automatic corrections as well. And we have the ability to adjust the settings, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that soon, so that you can also determine just how aggressive or conservative you would like that automatic correction to be as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about exercise activity when we talk about strategies for exercise. Okay, so what insulin settings actually affect the automation? And so different algorithms on the market use different settings to determine how it actually adjusts the insulin. And with Control-IQ, it's designed like traditional pump therapy. It allows the user, together with your healthcare team, you being the person with diabetes, together with your healthcare team, to adjust those settings. The settings that can be adjustable are basal rate. So again, that's your background insulin that's dripping in every 5 minutes. The carbohydrate ratio, so the amount of insulin that is delivered for a designated amount of carbohydrate, and the correction factor. And that's just how much your glucose drops by 1 unit of insulin. The target of the system is fixed at 6.1. This is a really highly studied number. Research shows that when we lower that target, it actually increases the risk for hypoglycemia. When we have a very dynamic system, so a system that's moving every 5 minutes, like Control-IQ, it is far easier to achieve a tight target with less variability in our levels. We see a much sort of less variability in them when that system is adjusting every 5 minutes when it's aiming for this target. The insulin duration is also fixed. It follows the action of the rapid-acting insulin that is put into the pump. So it knows that the bulk of the insulin is diminished at about the 3-hour mark. So how the information is used in the system. So we have that basal modulation. That's one side of the automation. And that's when that system is modulating every 5 minutes. It might be increasing or decreasing to help you keep your levels in range. And to do that, it uses that program basal rate, and it uses that just whatever you've got programmed as a launching point for the system. It can actually modulate up to 4 times the amount that is programmed in that profile. So it's really quite impressive in its ability to increase when your glucose levels are rising, but also to decrease if your levels are dropping. And that might often be the case with exercise. And then our automatic corrections, as I said, they can be delivered up to once per hour, very much like a traditional correction that you might be delivering. And it uses that correction factor and its target and what your predicted glucose level is in order to determine just how much it's going to deliver. Now, let me tell you a little bit of a secret about the system. The secret source of the system is, in fact, the correction factor. Because it's involved in both the 5-minute automation as well as those automatic corrections, it's essentially doing that correction, and that's a very important information. And so you and your team can determine just how aggressive you want that automation to be. It's a very, very powerful lever that you can use. And whilst diabetes might be a common denominator amongst you all, it really is different for everyone. And so having an algorithm that you have some input into how it operates can be really, really helpful. So now let's talk about your diabetes management for exercise. So we have, in essence, 4 different strategies that we can apply with the Control-IQ algorithm. And these are a temporary rate. We can use our exercise activity. We can also use a dedicated personal profile. I'm going to talk to you all about what they are for those who are not familiar with the T-Slim. And a trick that we've very much come to know and love, and that is actually blocking those automatic corrections. And this can be really helpful in a couple of different situations. So when we're exercising with type 1 diabetes, we are solving for 2 very common problems. The first is pre-exercise, and that is minimizing any insulin on board. We call it insulin on board. So that's the insulin that has been delivered. Either you've done it via injection or you've done it via the pump at that time of exercise. And many of you asked, how do we reduce hypos during exercise? And this is the #1 goal in preventing hypos during and after sport. And the second problem that we're solving for is post-exercise. And that is typically low glucose levels that result from muscle glycogen replacement. And so glucose stored in the muscle is called glycogen. And after exercise, our cells are very, very sensitive to insulin, meaning we need less often to do the same job. And that glucose starts to get sucked up by our muscles to replenish our stores, getting ready for the next bout of getting ready for the next bout of exercise. And so all of this can reduce the glucose in our blood, increasing the risk for glucose, keeping the risk of low glucose levels up to 48 hours post your exercise, particularly if that sport has been intense or it's been significantly longer in duration. So our first strategy that we can use is called temporary rates. So this is used to manually decrease or increase that basal rate. So you can set the duration of that adjustment in 1 minute intervals. So you can set it anywhere from 15 minutes and it can go up to 3 days in duration, that adjustment. And you set it in a percentage of your basal. So for example, if you wanted half of your basal, you would set it at 50%. It is recommended that you commence the temp rate, again, roughly around that 60 to 90 minutes before exercise commences. So this can be a really helpful tool for short periods of time where we might have different insulin needs. Again, because it does go for 3 days with the TSM, you can set it for weekends versus weekdays, some high stress environments or competition. These are all helpful uses using this method. However, to use this feature, you need to turn off Control IQ, because in essence, you're trying to do what automation does. And there isn't any protection then from lows or high glucose levels, i.e. it's not doing any automation. It also only offers a change in basal rates or that background insulin. It doesn't offer any change for bolus insulin, either for food or corrections. So this would need to be manually adjusted, and you can do that. So for this reason, this strategy is actually our least recommended strategy out of the 4, but we recognise that some of you might have worked out to an absolute fine art the exact percentage that you need of basal and precise timing to start and stop as well. And so for that reason, it is absolutely a strategy that you could utilise. So our next recommended strategy is to utilise Tandem's exercise activity algorithm. And so as I discussed before, turning on Control IQ's exercise activity instantly changes. Just at the touch of a button, we're not waiting for the system to do anything. It instantly changes at that point in time those treatment values. And the system begins to decrease that basal insulin at a higher glucose when it's predicted to be at 7.8 rather than 6.25. And again, it suspends sooner when it's predicted to be at 4.4. And this helps to reduce that risk of hypoglycemia or low glucose levels. So the use of exercise activity is, again, very similar to temp basal rates. It's just a little bit more refined. Is excellent for decreasing automated insulin for short periods of time. And depending on the type of activity, your insulin sensitivity, we would always say that this is your first line of defense. And for some people can be effective on its own, reducing the risk of hypoglycemia. So in helping to solve problem 1, if you remember that rapid acting insulin starts to work within sort of 5 to 15 minutes and it peaks at hour 1 to 2, then to minimize that insulin on board, it's recommended that we turn exercise activity on 60 to 90 minutes before that activity actually starts. What we often commonly see is people turn it on or they start to reduce their insulin right before they exercise, and then of course they go low. So it's because of the profile of rapid acting insulin, it just doesn't work as fast as human insulin. So we need to preempt those things a little bit and start to decrease it earlier before we start exercising. So how long do you use exercise activity for? Well, with the new timer that we introduced in the last software update in April, it can be turned on and set anywhere from 30 minutes to 8 hours. And then afterwards, it automatically returns to that standard algorithm without any intervention. You can also manually turn it on and manually turn it off. So if you have an extended period of that risk of low glucose levels afterwards, then by all means, you can manually turn that on, and you could just leave it on for as long as you like. It's just that you need to manually turn it off as well, so you need to remember to do that. In terms of timing for turning it off, again, this really depends on the activity and what comes after. You know, are you eating right after? Are you taking a shower and disconnecting, and therefore it's going to be suspended and not delivering anyway? Are you going to work? What's happening, you know, in that activity should be considered as well, because that might, you know, change what happens to your glucose levels and might then to change how long you want to keep exercise activity on for. So our third strategy, so as often is the case, what might be a reduction for some is not enough for others. And so again, it's why a one size fits all approach rarely suits all people and even all situations for the same person. And so if exercise activity is not sufficient on its own, we introduce a second line of defense, and that is a customized personal profile. So again, there are rarely 2 days the same with diabetes, and where you have significant changes in insulin requirements, be it hormonal, it might be active versus inactive days, it might be sick days, it might be weekend versus weekend days, or it might be competition days. These are sorts of times where we do need where we have significant changes. Perhaps you've hurt your shoulder and you need a steroid or a cortisone injection. Of course, that often, really significantly increases your insulin requirement. So these are times where significant changes are needed. And so for those not familiar with the t:slim pump, the personal profiles is just the name that we call it, and it's the place in the pump where all of those pump settings are stored. And the t:slim allows for up to 6 completely different profiles. And you can activate these at the touch of a button, changing that launching point of the automation. So there's no more sort of waiting for AI to catch up, meaning less lows and less highs. And so this can be really helpful where exercise is not consistent, be it the day, be it the duration or time or intensity. And in this way, CIQ really does handle life's curveballs on glucose levels relatively easily and simply. So in each of these personal profiles, we set the following 5 key pieces of information. We have that basal rate. So again, that's being delivered every 5 minutes and essentially replaces long-acting insulin. We have that carbohydrate ratio, so the amount of grams that 1 unit of insulin will cover, the correction factor, the number of millimoles that 1 unit will decrease, 1 unit of insulin will decrease, that target glucose, and in the case that's 6.1 when CIQ is turned on and activated, and also the insulin duration. And these amounts, they can be different at different times of the day. What you need in the morning may not be what you need at night. So that can be all programmed in the back of the pump. These are initially worked out by your healthcare team based on some reference calculations. So all of the insulin settings are in one menu of the pump, and you can add up to 16 different time segments in each of the 6 profiles. In reality, you may only start with 1 to 2 and end up with somewhere between 3 to 5. In the past, we probably used to set in lots of time segments for those that are quite familiar with pump therapy. And that's because we were trying to do the job of what automation does now. So we don't typically need a huge number of time segments anymore. The automation can do that in itself. And you can really easily edit, duplicate, or delete different profiles. So it's quite easy to manage. So when it comes to exercise, personal profiles are your secret weapon. When Control-IQ technology is turned on, that active personal profile settings are used as inputs into the algorithm. And again, in this way, you have input into how the algorithm works. So the system requires basal profile, insulin to carb ratios, and correction factors in order to make those insulin adjustments. And where you have a significant drop in insulin, for example, it might be 50 to 80% reduction in basal, we can then program this easily into the dedicated personal profile. So if we weaken the correction factor, the automatic corrections and basal modulation are going to be weaker as well. In the same vein, if we make them stronger, well, then those automatic corrections are going to be stronger as well. In the same way, we can also alter the carbohydrate ratio to calculate and suggest a specific reduction. I'm sure many of you might be have been told by your healthcare team, maybe you have 50% less of your carbohydrate before you do your sport, or it might be even more potentially. It depends on your sport and timing and other things as well. So using this strategy can be really helpful for medium or longer periods of time where those needs are significantly different. Again, this might be something that you set for, maybe you've got a 3-day carnival and we need a significant reduction over a longer period of time. It might be changes in hormones for menstruation. It might be exams or even training camps. So how much exactly do we reduce it? We need to reduce the insulin before, during, and after. And we would generally suggest reducing 60 to 90 minutes beforehand and up to 6 hours after, depending on your insulin sensitivity, that exercise duration and intensity. So after exercise, it might also be helpful to lower the basal overnight, make your carbohydrate ratio less aggressive, so less insulin is calculated for food, potentially even a reduction in your correction factor as well. And so using a personal profile can also be really helpful if you've forgotten to activate, or you forget to activate that exercise activity, even if you often forget to activate your personal profile 60 to 90 minutes beforehand. If I ask the audience who's ever planned to go for a run or exercise after work, or perhaps at some time later in the day, might even be in the morning. And so as you get out your exercise gear, then you've gone to go for your run. Before you've even started, you're only halfway out the door and you're already low, because we've forgotten to do that, because life is life and diabetes is diabetes. And whilst it's nice to be all planned, sometimes life gets in the way of trying to remember all these things. There are additional things that we have to remember to do. My guess is that probably, if I asked you all to raise your hand, probably most of you raised it. And so using this customized personal profile means that you can then add in a time segment. So let's say we're running at 5 o'clock and we want to reduce that insulin at 3:30, that's 90 minutes beforehand. We can then activate that profile. We can set in a time segment for 3:30 to reduce that insulin. It might even be then that reduction in carbohydrate ratio, so it's offering less. And you might then activate that in the morning. So the rest of the time segments of that day are exactly the same. It just gets to 3:30 in the afternoon. You're busy getting your work done, or you're at school or uni, and it will automatically start that decrease for you, so that when you go to do your run at 5, the work has already been done. And it might be easier for you to remember in the morning when you're getting out your gear, as you're planning your day, the day ahead of you. And so in the same way, perhaps the after dinner is the same, and then maybe before you go to bed, you might then reactivate your normal profile for the next day if we're not going to run again. So in this way, this can be a really helpful tool. If you're forgetful like me, then these things you can pre-program and you can put them in. As I said before, you can do the same thing with the carbohydrate ratio. I think it's one of the greatest things about having a personal profile. So I mentioned before about maybe needing half your carbohydrate bolus. So in the same vein, let's say you're having your afternoon tea at 4 o'clock. Time has already ticked over at 3:30. It knows that any boluses that are being delivered 3:30 onwards to offer half the amount of insulin. So you just still put in the same amount of carbohydrates and it will automatically offer less. So let's say it would normally offer 5 units for your sandwich. Instead, it's only going to offer you 2.5. It's just all trying to make your job with diabetes easier and easy to get it right. And so this is just one of those useful tools that we can use. And so here is an example I've put in here of some 3 different personal profiles. So in the middle here, we've got our Monday to Friday, we've got our medication where you might need perhaps a little bit more insulin, but in the middle we have our long run. And so in the middle there, you can see I've just halved the amount of basal. So we've gone from 0.525 units of insulin down to 0.225. We're also giving half the amount of insulin for our food, and we've also slightly reduced the correction factor as well that will dampen the effect of modulation and the automatic corrections. Now, I am a believer of practical solutions. So our last line of defense is blocking the auto correction. So unfortunately, if we haven't reduced the insulin and we haven't minimized that insulin on board prior to the activity, we don't really have much choice but to have some fast-acting carbohydrates before we exercise. This might be the case where you have forgotten to turn on that exercise activity, or you've forgotten to activate your customized personal profile. It will depend on your current glucose levels, where your glucose level is trending up or down as per your CGM, how much insulin you have on board, the type and duration of exercise, just how much you need to eat. But generally anywhere from 15 to 30 grams of carbohydrate is a good starting point. But the goal of any advanced hybrid closed loop system is to keep you in range. So the algorithm sees that you've had carbohydrate and says, don't worry, Sam, I have got you. And then the next minute it delivers an automatic correction. You start your exercise and before you've run a K, you're low. And so to mitigate this automatic correction, what we can do, so you're going to have your rapid acting carbohydrate before you head out on your exercise. I keep saying run, but it could be anything else that you might be up to. And so to mitigate that automatic correction, or to stop it in its tracks, we can deliver the smallest bolus. And on the T-Slim pump, that is 0.05 of a unit. And we can deliver that before exercise, and that will block the automatic correction for an hour. And so in this case, it's likely that you'll have your carbohydrate, glucose level will rise a little, and then your exercise will naturally bring it down, and we won't have that automatic correction. I would still recommend that you might turn on exercise activity. This will immediately start to reduce insulin, but it will be more forward. So it's not going to affect right now. It's going to start to reduce it for later on. Okay, so now that we've understand all of our different options, let's look at 3 different scenarios and see the tactic in action. So I'm going to invite Dr. Cracknell back on the screen with me to join me in some conversation about what we're going to do with each of these different scenarios. All right, Dr. Cracknell, our first scenario is we have our morning walker, Jo. Now, Jo has had type 1 for 2 years, and she loves a 1 hour mid-morning walk with her dog Rufus most days of the week. She started on a T-Slim pump with Control IQ just recently, so she's still working it all out. It's worthwhile noting that Rufus doesn't like the rain, and so the walk can be cancelled ad hoc just like that if it starts to rain a little. So what's our strategy? So obviously the management that usually required at this point is to know we need to reduce any insulin on board, and we might start to reduce that insulin 60 to 90 minutes beforehand. So our CIQ strategies, I would suggest, and I'm going to hear Grant's solutions too, is that we would probably then turn on exercise activity as that first line of defense. For some, this will work really effectively, and that might be just enough on its own. We can also set the timer so that Jo doesn't have to remember to turn off exercise activity afterwards. So we might set it during for the 1 hour walk, and maybe 1 to 2 hours post if Jo often experiences a bit of a low post that. So it might be a total of around sort of 3.5 to 4 hours. Any other suggestions there, Grant?
No, I would agree with that, Sam. I'd be trying to reduce, because our insulin, as you said, is not exactly the same as pancreatic insulin. It once you put a little bit in, it hangs around for about 2 to 3 hours. You need to be, if you can, preemptively reducing your insulin before you exercise. And so if you've got an exercise mode in your pump or an activity exercise profile that you're using in Control IQ, try and turn that on 60 to 90 minutes before you're exercising, because that'll mean that when you're exercising that you've now got less insulin on board, and that's what you want, that low insulin status. So, yeah.
Perfect. I've also said in case Jo wants a little bit of breakfast before she goes, would need to consider having a reduction in that insulin, again, trying to reduce the amount on board, knowing that exercise will mop some of that up. And a starting point is usually 50%. Do you recommend anything different?
Yeah, no, that's a good starting point, because remember, insulin is trying to store your glucose away, and your muscles going, don't store it, I want it. So you don't want to put too much in. But, sometimes people find if they don't bolus for it, they go really high before they go low. So starting with 50% is a good way, and then you work out yourself what works for you based around that.
Perfect. Obviously, always carry hypo treatment. This is quite sort of simplistic in nature, but again, it's a good one. It's ones that you might use, and the same sort of strategy can be utilised for housework, for gardening. It might be labour, it might be shopping, it could be anything that you're doing where levels might be sort of starting to go low. So same strategy applies.
And Sam, I'll add in there, it sounds bizarre, but sometimes the least exertive activity, like ironing, is the activity that makes your sugar level go low the fastest.
So true. I'm told arms make it drop lower faster. I don't know if that's true. Okay, our next scenario is our gym junkie Jan. Excuse the name. So Jan enjoys lifting weights at the gym for 1 to 2 hours in the morning. We could do it another time of day, but we just said in the morning. She finds the weights lead to a rise in her glucose levels from that anaerobic effect that we were speaking about earlier, but is heading low by lunch. So let's think about our strategies here. So we've said exercise management might be no, or it might even be a slight increase in insulin prior to the exercise with the anaerobic effect, and then a reduction in insulin post. Any other strategies from the actual exercise management strategies? I know you had a great one when you were speaking, Grant, around if there was some cardio or weights, we do which one first?
Yeah, and if you see your sugar level going up from that study, you go, okay, great, I'm going to do my cardio first and start to bring it down. And so I'll get to a lower level before I then do my anaerobic component in there. But yeah.
Right. So our CIQ strategies, Control IQ strategies, we suggested with the correction insulin, you might be able to bolus as needed. we often call that a micro bolus. So remember, you can deliver as little as 0.05 of a unit, and that goes up in increments. It sounds ridiculous, of 0.01, but you might only need the tiniest amount of insulin. It is one of the benefits of pump therapy. The smallest amount we can deliver on a pen, if my memory serves me correct, is still half a unit, which is quite a lot. So you might be able to, if you need less, then you can do that. And of course, you might then want to reduce your correction bolus by 50% as well. Do you want to talk to that, Gren?
Yeah, and the first thing I'd say is don't be alarmed if you see your sugar level rising during exercise. That's not a harmful thing. The only time you really want to stress about it is if you feel yuck during your exercise, or, as one of the runners who was on the question said, yeah, my ketones go up when I exercise. So, okay, they're the things you want to try and deal with. But if your sugar levels go up and you feel fine, don't stress. Don't try and overmanage it. If your sugar levels go up and you're gym junkie Jan and you feel yucky because your sugar levels get to 18 millimoles per litre during your exercise session, yeah, do your little micro bolus beforehand just to try and blunt that effect. And you probably won't end up with a sugar level of 5 during exercise. But, if it drops your exercise session glucose down to 10 instead of 18, you'll feel a lot better, and that'll be a good outcome.
Okay, and so exercise activity, we said pre-gym, so it mightn't need to be quite so early because we have got the rise. So this is one that we can activate a little bit closer to the exercise. So a little bit less planning, knowing there is a slight rise to begin with. And then we set the timer to turn off post-lunch. So its work actually starts to happen after the gym session, where we need it to start helping to keep levels up a little bit. Got an itchy nose.
Yeah. And I would suggest in there too, Sam, that if you're a person who really gets quite a high rise in your glucose level with exercise, is don't turn your exercise activity profile on 90 minutes before your exercise, because that's reducing how much insulin's on board. Is turn it on as you start your gym session, because by the time you're finishing your gym session, that's when your basal insulin is then going to be, or your insulin on board is going to be lower, and that's when your muscles are now going, right, now I've got to soak up all that glucose and start to drop it down. So turn that Control IQ activity profile on as you're heading to the gym.
Brilliant. We did suggest another thing that you could do. So again, thinking about time segments with the personal profile. So we're often forgetting to do some of these things beforehand, but you could then activate a dedicated gym personal profile with a slight increase in insulin pre-workout with a reduction post. And you could time block that with a time segment and set that the night before perhaps. So again, all different strategies. It's up to the individual to decide what works for them. Beautiful. All right. Our last scenario, but I'm going to turn our last scenario, Grant, into 3 different scenarios, and I hope that's okay. We have our after work runner, Tom. Now, Tom finishes work at 4:30. I'm a bit jealous. He finishes a bit earlier than I do. And he likes to run home, which is about 7 Ks, 3 to 5 days a week, which takes about 40 minutes. There's no pattern on the days that Tom runs. He's quite busy, quite a heavy schedule at work, and sometimes there might be some after work meetings or bits and pieces. And so often Tim might forget then to reduce his insulin, and on these days he ends up going low mid-run. And so Tom's tried having a banana or some other sort of carbohydrate before he heads off on his run, but this doesn't always help either. So what's our plan here? So again, the strategies, the reasoning is still the same. We still need to decrease that insulin 60 to 90 minutes beforehand, and then potentially reduce the insulin after the run and even overnight as well, if it's had a sort of significant effect at the end of the day. So from a CIQ strategy point of view, again, we need to turn on exercise activity, but Tom's sort of telling us that he often forgets to do that. Life is quite sort of busy. So this is sort of probably one of those circumstances where I would suggest this might be a really good chance to use his customized personal profile. He sets that in the morning when he packs his gear and heads to work. And so he programs in that time segment at 3, that's 90 minutes before his run. And he reduces that basal 50 to 80%. And that's a little bit of trial and error to see what sort of Tom needs. And he then might weaken that carb ratio. So in case he does have any afternoon tea, it will offer less. And it might even be a significant reduction even before that, knowing that insulin's still working in your system for a good 3-4 hours after bolus. We could then reduce the basal overnight if needed. I mean, some automation will do a pretty good job on its own, but if there are some significant reductions or is experiencing some lows overnight, he could then reduce that basal by 10% overnight. And again, that correction factor reduction for 4 hours post as well. Any other additions there, Grant?
No, I think all those strategies are good because essentially what he needs is really less insulin whilst he's running because his sugar levels go low. And hey, whether you do that with an activity profile, whether you do that with a preset pattern that you turn on, because, Tom's probably going to know a couple of hours before the end of the day whether it's going to be a run day or not, whether he's got a chance to do it, whether the day's crazy. So he's probably going to have a chance to turn on his exercise profile and reduce his insulin on board 90 minutes before his activity. Typically, what you'll find if you're on multiple daily injections, or if you forget to turn your pump into a reduced basal state, is that a banana sometimes is not enough, particularly if you're going to go for 40 minutes or if it's an hour run, because the amount of glucose you use is a lot. Yep. So that 20 grams of carbs that you get in may not be enough to stop a hypo, particularly if your sugar level's sitting at 7 or 8 before you start your run. And so he goes, I'm really disappointed. I've had a banana and I've still gone low. It's a sign how much glucose you're using during that activity. So the key is really about trying to reduce that insulin if you can.
Yeah, definitely. I was also going to say that if he does have that banana, that's where we do want to block that automatic correction. It's probably why he has been going low for when he does have it, because again, that's the job of automation. It's to step in when, we've got some miscounted carbs. So we want to block that. So just to bolus that as little bolus as you can. If you don't even want to give 0.05, you can even start the bolus and cancel it in 5 seconds and it will still block it for an hour. Now, I was thinking this morning whilst I was going for a jog with my dog, I think the dog was going for a faster jog than I was this morning, but I did think, what about if people don't want to wear their pump? Because it is a viable solution, right? We're talking about a strategy to run, but Tommy is only running for a relatively short sort of time at 40 minutes. What if he wants to take his pump off to run? So what's the strategy there?
Yeah, great. And that's a great question. And this becomes pertinent for things like taekwondo, for swimmers, for those times when it's actually not practical. If you're jumping around in a high intensity fit 45 class, probably don't want to wear your pump on because it's going to be bouncing around your ears. So it's perfectly perfectly okay to take your pump off for 90 minutes, 2 hours if you need to. So for Tom, it would be perfectly okay to take his pump off, put it in his pocket or in his whatever he's using, his bum bag to run home with.
His work gear behind him.
Yeah, put it in there, put his backpack that he's got in there and run home without his pump. And then when he gets home, put his pump on and decide, based on what happens, okay, when I put my pump on, do I need to reduce my insulin that I'm getting in because after my run, my sugar levels go low? He's had his pump off for 40 minutes an hour. So he's reduced his basal insulin by doing that. And so if you like, it's like putting it into exercise mode. And so then just to put his pump on at home and goes, maybe I should reduce my insulin. Should I put it into exercise activity profile? Should I put it on a temporary basal rate? What should I do?
Excellent. Good. All right. I'm going to turn this into another question. So we had lots of endurance runners as part of our questions. So let's say Tom is not running for 7K. Let's say Tom is aiming for marathon, something that is a much longer duration. What do we do then?
Yeah, okay, so it's going to be really critical for him to have reduced his basal insulin before he starts running. It's going to be a training run, and if he's going to go and do a 25, 30K run to train for his marathon, it's not going to be full tilt. It's going to be at a steady pace to be able to finish that in a good time. So he's probably going to see his glucose levels drop after maybe a slight rise, but they're going to drop pretty quickly. Yep. So he's really going to need to reduce his basal insulin through that. And what he'll probably need to do is about 45 minutes into his run is he's going to need to start putting in around about 20 grams of carbohydrates every 20 minutes or so. And I think one of the questions I answered online was that if you put those carbs in, sometimes people see a really big spike in their sugar levels. But generally the rule when you're exercising is that when you're actually physically active and you put carbs in, the absorption of those carbohydrates and the amount that actually puts your sugar level up is not as much as you'd expect. Yeah. And so that can be important if you have a hypo while you're exercising, because you sometimes need to stop to treat your hypo rather than continuing to exercise to treat it. But so Tom's going to need to start putting some carbs in, and he'll probably be practicing his strategy for his marathon. He'll have a gel bag with him. He'll have, a vest with him with some carbs in there and some carbohydrate fluids. So it's going to need to start putting some carbs in every 20 minutes or so.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. All right. I think that's the end of our strategies. I haven't had a chance to have a look at all the Q&A yet, but I think we've made up a fair bit of time this morning. So we might be able to add any more sort of questions or things at the end when we have some panel time. How does that sound?
Yep, that sounds good, because there'll be some specific things people want to ask.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Cracknell. As always, wonderful to talk. I'm going to hand it back to Julia. I suspect it's time for another short break.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sam and Dr. Cracknell. That was so interesting. And we've had so many great questions come through our Q&A, and I think you did a really great job there of answering a lot of them. So hopefully people are walking away with some really great tips on how they manage their very own sports and exercise routine. Now, it is that time for another quick tea or coffee break. Jump up, stretch your legs, do 10 star jumps, whatever you need to have a break. And let's come back in 5 minutes and we're going to hear from our Dexcom warriors, which we're very excited about. So we'll see you all soon. 5 minutes, have a quick tea or coffee, and we'll come back to hear from the warriors.
Thanks.
All right, we'll slowly come back together. I hope everybody's had the chance to stretch their legs. I hope you're all feeling inspired and ready to get started with whatever it is you do exercise-wise. Very excited for our next section now. We get the opportunity to talk to our wonderful Dexcom warriors. So once you're all sitting back, get settled in, and we'll just start by looking at our Dexcom warrior video.
Diabetes may be a battle, but just because you have this does not mean that there aren't things that you can't achieve or strive for in your life.
Put your mind to it, put in the hard work, make it happen.
We absolutely love our Dexcom warriors, and you will hear a bit from Sam at the end about how you yourself might become a Dexcom warrior. Now, just a little note, the content provided by our Dexcom warriors today are their own thoughts and opinions. Any comparisons or products highlighted in their presentations is the experience, knowledge, and evaluation of their own. Make sure if you have any questions for the warriors while we're talking that you do direct them to the Q&A, because I do believe we'll have time to ask them some additional questions today. Now, who we have today? All right. Now bear with me a tick. Just lost my view. 1 second. Okay, so sorry, today we have Emma Sue Greentree joining us. Sorry for the tech, I keep minimizing my thing and losing my notes. Emma Sue Greentree is a professional boxer. She was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes almost 16 years ago. She's been boxing for 8 years and has achieved multiple state and national medals. In 2023, she won 3 international gold medals and got 3rd place at the Women's World Championships in India. We also have Lara McSpadden. Lara was diagnosed, a professional basketballer. Lara was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes over 17 years ago. She has represented Australia in international competitions and currently plays for the Rockhampton Cyclones. She's also completing her last semester of study in the Bachelor of Secondary Education. And last but not least, we have Liam Colquhoun. Liam Colquhoun is an ultra marathon runner. A week before his 10th birthday, Liam was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. He's an exercise enthusiast and has raced in several ultra marathons and intends to participate in many more in the future to raise awareness about type 1 diabetes. So, Emma, Lara, and Liam, if you want to share your videos and your audio so we can have a chat, that would be great. It'd be good to see you all. I'll just get up what I need. How are we all this morning?
Good, really good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate having you here today. Now, Emma, I'm going to throw the first punch, excuse the pun, and just ask, can you share with us your journey of being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and how it's affected your life and sporting career?
Well, I was diagnosed at 9. I haven't actually been boxing my whole life before boxing. So I started boxing at 17. Before boxing, I did athletics, and I actually did athletics with Lara, which is actually
wow.
So we did athletics together, but so I did athletics all through kind of high school, and then once I turned 17, I just felt like I wasn't getting any better, so I decided to try boxing. Just stuck with that since. But with the diabetes, like I was really lucky in a sense through diagnosis. Like my doctor was really supportive. My mum asked all the questions. Like she knew I loved like sport. And like one of her first questions was, oh, does this mean Emma can still do sport? And I'm sitting there going, what do you mean? Like, because I'm 9, not really knowing what it is. I was like, what do you mean? Why are you asking that? Like, come on, mum. And but no, my doctor was really supportive, and he just said it's just going to take a little bit of extra care. So yeah, I was on the finger pricks and multiple daily injections, and then once once the Dexcom came along, I tried that. It was the one where you had to automatically put it in yourself.
Yep. So it's changed a lot since then, hasn't it?
Yeah. But I found that it really did help with all aspects of my sporting, just having the live, like, you know, my coaches can check my bloods and they know when I'm going low. They kind of, they'll feed me lollies or juice or what I need when I ask for it or when I need it. But I've found that yeah, the technologies have come a long way and really helped me with my sport.
Yeah, thank you. It's a big question we had come through from some of our respondents, was in a combat sport such as boxing. So you're obviously wearing the Dexcom, and have you got your coaches on the sideline monitoring it? Do you see your levels at all while you're mid-training?
No. Training, yes. But in a bout, no.
No.
I don't look at them at all. Yeah, it's all kind of my coaches. So
yeah. And where do you wear the Dexcom? How do you keep it secure while you're in such an intense match?
So I've tried a lot of different areas. Obviously with boxing, like I can't exactly wear it on the back of my arm because it is quite, like, it'll just get ripped off. But yeah, the lower abdomen, because we have like a belt line, so it's like just kind of below the belly button.
Yeah.
You can stick it under there. And then I use a lot of like strapping tapes, like the stretchy KT tape. I just stick that over the top, make sure it, you know, just put it all there and make sure it doesn't come off. It does come off early sometimes, but like, yeah, you just kind of figure it out.
Yeah, wonderful. So you have found a way to keep it on and have it going, and you've got your coaches and your team on the sideline monitoring. Yeah. That's fantastic. Now, I imagine for big days, so say, for example, the World Championships in India, that's a massive day. You're in a different country, you've got a lot of people, it's incredibly hot, the nerves must have been through the roof. How do you possibly prepare for a day like that, not only as an athlete, but as someone living with type 1 diabetes?
When I found out actually going to India, I was really nervous in regards to my diabetes, just knowing that it's quite different there. You know, hospitals and stuff are very different to Australia. But I think my main prep was making sure that I had kind of what I needed in regards to like hypos and things, and traveling with all my insulin and stuff, like making sure it stayed cold. And so before I wasn't on an insulin pump during the Women's World Championship, so I was on the injection. So I just had to keep, you know, make sure everything was kept cool when I got there, straight in the fridge when I got there. But yeah, prepping, I think mentally, sorry.
All right.
Yeah, so mentally for me, like, and physically, the prep was a lot different. Like my insulin levels had to be reduced because my training was upped like massively. And in India, just before, I think I've had about 4 fights over there in the competition.
Wow.
To get to the the semis where I got the bronze. But I was really, like, I've, touched wood, never had a low in a bout. I've always tried to sit, for me personally, I've always tried to sit around 9, just because I know that in the ring, I'm in there for about 15 minutes max. So the 9 for me, I just feel more comfortable, and yeah, that's just like where I like to sit.
Yeah.
It was hard though in India. I found, because the food as well is very different. and there's a lot of risk for like upset stomachs and stuff. Like I was really nervous in regards to that sort of stuff, but yeah, I managed it. And I think just having the confidence to manage it, and having also my doctors like I was emailing them like nonstop, like, oh, what do I do for this? What do I do for that? And my educators and stuff. Like it was just, I had a really good team. And I think that was really important for me as well.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like such a fantastic result in what would have been an incredibly difficult thing to imagine. And I hope that inspires a lot of people listening, is that with careful planning, with support and a team around you, you can really do anything. Have you, in that moment, you're saying you're staying around 9, but say for a fight or a really big competition, have you ever had a hypo in the middle of a boxing bout? Or
No, I've never had one during a bout. I've had one afterwards.
Yeah.
And actually in the semi-finals, I was quite high. I was really high just before, well, not just before, but maybe about half an hour before. So I've had a correction, and then I think I overcorrected a little bit. So then I've seen my arrows going double arrows down. I was like, oh no, this is not what I want. But I ended up just eating some lollies and I was fine. I leveled out and I was fine. But yeah, that created a lot of nerves within me, which made the semis a little bit harder. But yeah, I think it was a very cool experience.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations. And it sounds like you managed, a difficult comp at the best of times really well.
Thank you.
What would you say is next in your sights in terms of boxing? What are you hoping to achieve when it comes to boxing?
Well, my biggest goal would be to go to the Olympics. I've missed out this year. Obviously it's starting to very soon. Yeah, very soon. I just missed out, but my goal is to maybe do Commonwealth Games and then the next one. And then maybe somewhere in that time I'm looking at going so instead of, because I'm an amateur boxer, elite amateur boxer, but I have been considering during that time to potentially go pro, which is much the same, just a little bit different. There'll be no headgears. You get to choose your own colors. That's pretty much the only difference. But that's kind of my goal. My main goal is definitely the Olympics.
Fantastic. 4 years on, that's a really exciting goal, and no doubt you'll achieve it. Now, you mentioned before when you're first diagnosed and you're a young girl sitting there and you're not quite sure what's going on, and people are talking about what's going to happen with exercise. If you could talk to somebody that is newly diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and might be thinking, well, I'm done, like I'm not going to be able to play competitive sports, what would you say?
Look, I would just say it's going to be hard, but you do need to push on. It's not the end of the world. For me, like I said, I was really lucky. I had a really good team, a really great support network as well. My friends and family, they always wanted to help me. But I think as a newly diagnosed child, I didn't really understand it, and to learn about it and to just go to things like this webinar has been I've learned a lot of things.
Fantastic. So have I. It's been great.
Yeah, I've already learned I've learned heaps just off this. So if the more things you can attend like this, the better. And it is a lot of trial and error.
Yeah.
And I guess just not to be scared. Things are gonna maybe mess up a little bit, but there's always a way around it. And just don't give up. Pretty much just don't give up.
Love it. Thanks, Emma. Sounds like anything is possible, and no doubt, I haven't looked, but I'm sure we'll have lots of questions coming through for you on the Q&A, so we might come back.
Yeah.
Now, it's not quite as intense as getting punched in the face, but Liam, I have heard ultra marathons are incredibly grueling. Can you talk us can you tell us a little bit about you, Liam, and in particular your type 1 diabetes journey, but how did you get into ultra marathons?
Yeah, so I first got into running through a diabetes charity, actually. It was October 2022, and it was run 144 kilometers, I believe, in the month of October for the 144,000 people in Australia living with type 1 diabetes. And I created a monthly plan where I'd run for 4Ks a day, and then that would get me to my total. But I missed a couple of days here and there, so I kept upping the distance more and more and more to catch up with it. And I really like running long distances, so I just kept doing more and more and more, and found out there's actual events for ultra marathons, and yeah, just stuck with it that way. And
That's fantastic. You got the running bug.
yeah.
What are some big races that you've done recently? When we're talking ultra marathons, break that down for people. Like, what kind of distance are we talking?
So the races that I've done at the moment, the biggest one I've done 60 Ks. I did one last week actually in Port Macquarie, which was 50 Ks and 2,500 meters of elevation.
Whoa.
I've done a couple runs around Kosciuszko, so that was my biggest one. I did a 60-kilometer self-supported run from Cathego Power Station, and then followed all the like 6-man huts up to the top, and did another 50K run 2 days before that, actually, around all the major summits in the Kosciuszko National Park. And
Oh my goodness.
yeah, my first one was in Canberra at Stromlo. That was another 50K one. But yeah, a few 50Ks here and there.
Just a minor 50K. Now, we did have a lot of questions coming through. I do think we have a lot of long distance runners or aspiring long distance runners listening today. Talk us through, so the Port Macquarie event, which was last weekend, it's a 50K race. What was your pre-run preparation on the day? What did you do during the run to fuel as well? And what kind of happened afterwards in terms of recovery? How did you approach it?
Yep, so pre-run, I didn't change anything that I was doing with training. So I was up at 4:30 to reduce my basal rates. I had 50 grams of carbs beforehand, just so I had enough energy going into it. Did the auto block, changed my personal profiles.
Sorry, Liam, just on that, I didn't ask you what technology you are currently using to manage.
Sorry, I'm on the T-Slim pump,
Okay.
and then the Dexcom, obviously.
Okay. Yeah, so you did a lot of those tips that Sam mentioned before.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
And then during the run, I had my vest on, and in the vest, I was carrying about 510 grams of carbs. And
Wow.
then during the aid stations, I was collecting more grams of carbs as well. So I think by the end of it, I had close to 600 grams of carbs.
All right. And were you running with your pump on?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And afterwards, I turned off my exercise profile, but then I put on another personal profile with a reduced basal rate and reduced carb ratio, and that stopped me going low afterwards as well.
Yeah. Fantastic. So 600 grams of carbohydrates throughout.
Yes.
And how long did the event take you?
That was just under 8 hours. It's 7 hours, 40 minutes.
Oh my goodness. That is
Yeah.
fantastic. Congratulations. That must have been really hard work, but it sounds like you managed it really well. How were you checking your Dexcom throughout?
So I have my Dexcom connected to my pump, and the shorts that I was wearing has just got like a little net where I can turn on the pump and quickly see it through the nets. And
Yeah, oh, fantastic. Okay. And did your glucose levels at any point, like, do you ever, when you're doing these long races or long runs, experience hypos throughout or lows throughout?
with the T-Slim and the exercise profile, I find that I don't go low very often. I catch my sugar levels dropping for sure, but that's when I know to eat something or to have something to drink with carbs in it, just to give that little bit of a spike again so I don't go low. And it's helpful with the basal being turned off. So I find that when I'm running, there's bouts for like 90 minutes where I'm getting no basal at all, just to keep my sugar levels in range.
Yep. Okay. Fantastic. What would you say to somebody that is considering getting into running with type 1 diabetes? How would you encourage them to get started with running?
Just go for it. As Emma said, it's a lot of trial and error, but yeah, it's fun to do. And if you want to do it, I'd just say get into it. And there was a lot of tips and tricks that we learnt today. I definitely use most, if not all of them. So for me, I find that they work. So yeah, just implementing those tips and getting into it.
Fantastic. And I don't imagine anyone that's perhaps not running as of yet, but does want to get started. I don't think they'd start with ultra marathons. Do you
No,
think?
I don't recommend that.
No, they might start with something smaller, build up to those ultra marathons, your 50Ks. Liam, have you ever tackled 100Ks?
Not yet. It's in the definitely in the books at the moment.
Fantastic. All right. Well, that will be a whole nother interesting experience, probably about 16 hours plus, right, to do 100Ks. Wow. Sounds like a lot of planning to go into that.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Liam. I have no doubt we'll have more questions coming through for you on the Q&A. Now, last but not least, thank you so much for joining us, Lara. I believe you flew in last minute, so glad the plane wasn't delayed.
Yeah, me too.
Now, with basketball being such a intense team sport, I imagine it's a little bit different, obviously different to your individual sports, such as boxing or running. When you look at your teammates, Lara, and your routines and their pre-game routines, do you notice a big difference in how you prepare for training or games in comparison to your teammates?
Yeah, so it has taken me like a long time and a bit of trial and error to figure out what works really well for me in terms of pre-game. I try to keep it as similar to the rest of the team as I can. What I might do though is when we warm up on our basketball court, we have like two teams, obviously. So we warm up on one half, but I might not like run as far as the other girls. I honestly, I do take it a little bit easier, and I go back and I frequently check my levels on my Dexcom as well. So I would just say I don't really do as much as the rest of the girls in the warm-up. In saying that though, I do still make sure I get like my specific like game shots up before like we start our team warm-up. So yeah, I just have to be like very careful with what I do. I don't want to exert too much energy, and yeah, that's usually what I do.
Yeah, that's really interesting to know, because we did have a lot of basketball and netball questions coming through about what tends to happen before and during the game. So you're using the Dexcom, and so throughout the game, you're coming back and checking that, or how do you keep an eye on that in the middle of a game?
In the middle of a game, I keep it at the front of the bench just in case it can like stay in range, but usually it does drop out because we're running all over the court. Yeah. So my teammates and my coaches are aware of like the signals that it makes and like what those mean. So if anything happens, then my coach will kind of like look at me and like I might run by him and he'll be like, this is happening, and I'll either ask for a sub or I'll say, no, I'm good. Like, yeah. But when it does go out of range, I always check my levels at quarter time, half time, and 3/4 time. So yeah. Most of our it sucks. Most of our games are like right in dinner time, which is annoying because I get hungry and whatever else, and then I have to make sure that I give my long acting like during the game. Just a few things to consider, but yeah, it's cool.
That is tricky. With your nighttime games, what do you do? What is your pre-game routine with meals and stuff like that? Or what's your nutrition strategy before a game at night?
I honestly try and keep it like similar to like a normal day. I'll have like my normal breakfast, normal lunch, but then I'll have like a snack like 2 hours before the game. I would probably call it a light meal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that just to see me through. It's funny, like Emma said that she likes to sit at 9 before she goes into her boxing. I'm the same. I like to keep my levels between 9 and 11. I've noticed that like throughout my career, that's been the level that best works for me, and I can like ride through like the game nicely, not dropping or going too high. Yeah, so yeah, I would just say I eat about 2 hours before the game. And I don't go too hard on my insulin because the nerves and the excitement, that all comes into play. And I found that I have gone low if I do give the same amount of insulin as I usually would before a game. So I reduce that by like 50% most times. Yeah.
Okay. What tends to happen to you? So you've had a big game. What tends to happen to your glucose levels after a game?
After a game, usually I'm more likely to go low. And it's like it's overnight as well. So I reduce my long acting. I'll reduce that by like or like 30 to 40%. And then just make sure that I have lots of like long acting carbs. Yeah. So that I don't crash. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it must be so tricky with the nighttime, right? Because you're playing the game, you've thrown your eating off, you've then got to go into bed. It's a tricky juggle, but it sounds like you're managing it well.
I hope so. Yeah.
One thing I'm just thinking of some of the questions we saw before the webinar. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but were you playing in Sydney before you moved up to Rockhampton?
Yes. So the
Yes.
previous season, I guess I was playing in Sydney. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Because an interesting question came through in terms of different temperatures and climate. So I imagine Rockhampton's a bit more muggy, a bit more humid. What have you noticed up there in terms of your glucose levels and how that impacts your basketball?
Well, it's a lot. You're right. It is a lot hotter and it's a lot more humid up here. I feel it definitely drains my energy quicker. So I'm finding that I'm not like having hypos necessarily, but I'm running lower than I
Yeah.
usually would, like more of the time. So just more juices, less heavy on the quick acting. But yeah, that's why I do like things like in the warm up, for example, I won't go as hard. I don't run as far, just to try and like conserve as much as I can for the game. Yeah.
I think that's a really good strategy, especially for our younger ones listening, because often you're trying so hard to keep up appearances and keep up with your teammates. But sometimes if you can make that adjustments and save that spark for the game, it'd make all the difference.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. My mom is always on my case and I appreciate it. She's always saying, don't go too hard in the warm up. Like you need to save yourself. And it really does make a difference. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking of, again, somebody newly diagnosed with type 1 or considering, what the future looks like for them in terms of competitive sport, what advice would you give someone that does want to get into, competitive basketball or netball or soccer?
I would just say, I mean, yeah, as everyone said on this webinar, like diabetes doesn't have to hold you back. Like, yeah, it really is as simple as that. Like you can do anything. It just requires a little bit more like time management and organization. But yeah, you can really do anything and you get to meet like great people as well. That's the thing. And if you are lucky enough to be in a team environment, you'll often find that that everyone in your team is really happy to like support you and do what they need to do to help you throughout like your sport with diabetes as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. I think that's a theme that's come through this webinar is there's nothing you can't do. Just a little bit more planning, and anything is possible, which is really nice to hear. I think there's a sport or exercise, whatever it is you love, that you should be able to get out there and do. Now we've no doubt had a lot of Q&A come through. So Sam, I'm wondering if you wanted to jump in with some questions that might have come through the audience today.
Just getting my camera on. You all three are amazing, but absolutely amazing, extraordinary human beings. It's been so nice hearing about all of your feats. Nice to see you again too, Lara. So we've had a few questions come through. I can see Grant has been tapping away answering everybody's questions. So thank you, Dr. Cracknell. Amazing. One of the ones that it says to the panel, so to all three of you, really interested to know what you have done to keep sensors on the body when competing and training. Still have not found the magic solution to consistently get 10 days with Dexcom. So dying to know what your strategies are. We have some of our own, but I'd love to hear what yours are. Real world solutions.
I'll start. So I use the type strong patches, the type 1 strong patches. I leave it as long as I can until I put them on, because I find that if I put the patch on as soon as I put the Dexcom on, it's just gonna like fade away anyway. So that's what I do. So I try and leave it to like day 7 or day 8, depending on how dodgy it's looking. But yeah, that's my strategy.
It's interesting you say that. I think we probably also did the same thing in the past. Technically, we actually recommend putting on an over patch, either the Dexcom ones themselves, and we can get those free. You can order those on the online shop, and the company will just send those out to you. But the type 1 strong ones, I know people like those. But if you're putting an over patch on, we would generally suggest putting it on from day 1. It actually helps the stability of the signal and can stay. So the strategy then you have to find is that if that then pops off, then you might have to put another one over the top or something else as another solution. But thank you. That's great to hear. Love strategies, real world, love it. What about you, Emma Sue? I think you've probably got a few solutions to come up with all of that physical contact. What are your solutions?
Yeah, so I found the ones that are actually from Dexcom, like the skin ones, they don't work for me, because as soon as it starts to sweat, it's just like
it's off. So what do you use? Same.
So yeah, I use very similar to what Lara uses. Like it's like the stretchy kind of tape material. Sometimes I cut my own out.
Okay.
You know, leave a little thing and then make like a T.
Yes.
but yeah, I make sure it's always the Dexcom itself is always out.
It's out. It helps with the humidity, the barrier. So that's
yeah. And what else do I do? I because with my clothing, like it's like a tight, not tight, but like I always try wear clothing that's like compression to where it sits. So it's kind of like when I'm training and competing, it's like pulling it in anyway. So it's like not loose clothing.
But not quite too tight that
just like
you found a fine balance between some sort of compression but not enough to stop the reading.
Yeah, so like I'm wearing right now, like I'm wearing my high-waisted leggings.
Great.
And it's just enough to kind of sit on the on the Dexcom itself, but not too much that's gonna annoy me.
Perfect.
Yeah.
There's so many different brands of different adhesives, and there's some other things that we can do in terms of putting. Sometimes you can use, we actually have a skin irritations guide that actually many of the actual branded solutions that you can use, and many of them actually help the adhesive stick even stronger, and you can kind of put a bit of a layer almost in a bit of a donut shape, then put the sensor on, and then potentially put something over the top. It's a bit of a sandwich type effect too. So if you're looking for that guide, I've got the team in the background trying to have a bit of a search for it to find it, but we can always send that out to you as well. We might add that in as a link when we send out the recording, perhaps as well, for those who might want that. What about you?
Just quickly, I've also found that making sure the area is really, really clean.
Yes.
And try to remove as much kind of hair as possible before I put it down.
Nice.
I'm not hairy or anything, but like just
We got you. What about
Yeah.
you, Em? Have you had any troubles with them staying on, or have you found a good solution?
More in the summer. I'm enjoying the colder weather at the moment because
Yeah.
it's staying on a little bit easier. But I use a skin glue tack. So it was that
Okay.
adhesive that you're talking about. So I'll wipe it down on my abdomen before I put the sensor on.
Yeah.
And I find I don't have to put on an over patch sometimes, but if it's hot and it's in the summer, I'll put a patch on over the top as well.
Perfect.
But yeah, the skin glue really helped me.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. What else have we got here? We've had a question for you, Emma Sue, from Grace. She says, would you be eligible for the Paralympics? And I thought it might be nice to hear your take on that.
No, I'm not. Yes, because diabetes isn't a disability as such. No, so we're not actually eligible for Paralympics. However, with Olympics and being a diabetic, I do have to, I'm sure everyone who competes in, like Lara will probably have one as well, and Liam, if I think you would probably need one as well, but like just a therapeutic use exemption for your insulin, because it is actually a banned substance.
Yeah.
But yeah, just as long as you have that, and someone asks you for it, you get asked for like a doping control test. You just have to say, this is my exemption. They usually last like 10 years. Like I think mine expires in 2028, so I'm going to need a new one then. But yeah, just as long as you're on top of that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Some good strategies. Thank you. Lara, I've had a question from Tegan, and she says, I play basketball as well, and my sensor comes off. She says, where do you wear it?
I wear mine on my lower abdomen as well. Yeah, I wear a compression top.
Okay.
I find I put my compression top on, and then that's covering my sensor, and then I put my shorts, I wear my shorts like kind of higher so that they don't ride down during the game, and then I feel like that provides a bit more protection as well. Yeah, I have tried it on my arm as well, but again, with the basketball and how much contact we get, didn't really find that it stayed on as long as the abdomen. Yeah.
Excellent. And I have the same question for you, Liam. Maybe Emma, so you can give your take too. Where do you like to wear your sensors? I think some of you might have answered. Liam, where do you like to put yours?
I rarely mine on my abdomen, but I have tried it on my arm before.
Okay.
Again, it just depends with the climate. During the summer, I try to avoid the arm because there's a lot of sweat coming down. But in the winter, like I find it's okay on the arm, but I'm most comfortable with the abdomen because I tend to lie on my side when I sleep. So
Some compression lows then.
Yeah.
Good. What about you, Emma Sue? I think you answered. Yeah.
Yeah, lower abdomen too. Definitely
good.
below the belt.
Excellent. Now I have had a question about travel, and so Emma Sue and Lara, the question was actually around how do you go with travel and taking all your equipment through the airports and things like that? I imagine you do both a fair bit of it if we're traveling to matches and other things.
What I've done actually in the last 2 years, I used to only take a backpack with me and I put everything in that. But what I've started to do is I'm wearing like a Nike cross bag with my needles and my spare equipment and a juice in that. So that's really easy. So when we travel to like the different states and whatever, I can put my backpack up in the overhead, and then I can just have that on me for whenever I need it. Traveling internationally, I always fly with a doctor's letter saying that I need to have whatever I need to have on my possession. I was traveling with a junior national team one time, and we were in China, and they took all my juices off me, and I was hysterical. But I mean, juices are easy enough to get when you're there, but I was just like, oh no. Yeah, I did have my letter, but like the language barrier just was not letting up. So yeah, but yeah, having like things like doctor's letters is really helpful as well.
Fantastic. How about you, Emma Sue? Anything to add?
Yeah, much the same with the doctor's letters, but I always will request a pat down. I just like I show them because I've got an insulin pump now. I show them my insulin pump and I'm like, this cannot go through the X-ray machine, and they're like, okay. They're usually pretty fine with it. Like I've been to India, I've been to Papua New Guinea, I've been to like those sort of places, and they've all been pretty sweet with it. I haven't had any troubles, because in reality there's type 1 diabetics all over the world, so I just hope that people do know, especially at airports, that they should know what type 1 diabetes is and what kind of is involved. So yeah, requesting a pat down is not really anything that's bad. Like they get you to wipe your hands on your pump, and then they take the swabs off your hands, but it's easier than having a broken pump.
That is true. Now I've put a couple of links for everybody sitting just in the chat box. You won't be able to respond to that, but I've put in some of the Dexcom CGM advice. It takes you to the Dexcom website and gives you all the info on the ins and outs of what to do with your tech. I've also put the link for Diabetes Australia in there. They've got some fantastic travel advice for traveling just with diabetes in general, with and without equipment. Dr. Cracknell's nicely responded as well. That letter from your endo is quite important. So please make sure you're sort of thinking ahead a little bit. Make sure you allow some time to see your endocrinologist or your GP for writing that letter, and can specify all the things that you need to travel as well. I think we've kind of sort of at the end. I think, Kat, thank you for responding to Greg as well. I don't know whether, Greg, you might have been able to see Kat's response. She says, I've done a lot of travel, and yes, having a letter from GP endo is key. I ended up asking for extra liquids to be included in that way as a hypo letter. There you go, Lara. You tried to do that. Like we still got that circumnavigated. Carry them with me, and that's worked really well. Does need to include any sharps you might need to carry. Thank you, Kat. Appreciate the response to help Greg. I think that last but not least, I always get asked, the one we get asked the most, what is your favorite hypo treatment whilst you are exercising? What do you use on the go?
Juice.
Emma Sue, what do you like to use?
Killer pythons.
Oh, nice. Good. What about you, Liam?
I'm the same, killer pythons.
Killer pythons. Killer pythons the win today, apparently. Alrighty, thank you to all of you. So amazing to have you all, and for such inspiration to all of you. I might just invite Dr. Grant Cracknell back onto the panel as well, and Juliet. Beautiful. I think we've had almost, Grant, you have been going very hard on all the questions, so thank you. I think you've answered almost all of them. I have Dr. Cracknell here. I've got all of our panelists and Juliet. If you've got any additional questions, you've got about a minute to get it in so we can ask the team, but I think we are almost done, I think, with answering them all. Have we missed anything? Is there anything else that is worth, that you've seen, Dr. Cracknell, that's worth mentioning that maybe you've answered? Or are we all good? I feel like we've responded to everything today.
No, I think between Emma Sue, Lara, Liam, and everything else that's covered,
well.
hopefully we've covered lots of people's questions. As
Beautiful.
I think you said earlier on, your circumstances are a bit individual, and it's a bit of a suck it and see or try and test. So use these principles and then work out how your body works and manipulate them a bit.
Perfect. All right. Let me just get my screen back a little bit. All right. Well, I think before I jump in to say thank you to you all, if you would like to become a warrior, just like Emma Sue, like Liam and Lara, you're most welcome to scan that QR code. It offers lots of wonderful, lovely little perks. I'm just going to steal my screen across here for a second. So, of course, you get to share your voice and connect and inspire others that have type 1 diabetes, just like our 3 wonderful athletes today. You get fast track news and updates direct to your inbox. Of course, you have an invitation for exclusive events and a little bit of swag kit as well, which is quite nice. So you can see there's some pictures of our Aussie warriors all on that screen. We love to hear from you, the people that are really living with type 1 and out there doing it. It is a real inspiration to every person. So please, you're most welcome to join our warrior crew. We also have a warrior event coming up, and then in the not too distant future, we've got our warrior mini Olympics. As I said earlier on, with only 5 days to go to the Olympics, I am ready, I am excited, I'm keen for some late nights. So if you would like to join this event and you are signed up as a warrior, you can come and join us on Sunday, the 28th of July. for 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. I understand that there's going to be lots of fun activities. By the sounds of it, there's going to be egg and spoon races and all sorts of fun, lots of games and quizzes, and it's suitable for anyone over the age of 5. So if you'd like to sign up to that too, by all means, scan that QR code. So with that, I want to say a very special thank you to Dr. Grant Cracknell. Presentation is always so, you make a complex topic so easy to understand. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you giving up your time with us to be with us today. A very special thank you to our 3 athletes, Emma, Sue, Lara and Liam. Just wonderful to hear about all the things that you're achieving in sport with Type 1. And of course, our wonderful MC, Juliet, today as well. I hope you've enjoyed being with us. I hope that you're going to take away some amazing tips today to get started. I hope it's inspired you. I hope we've answered all of your questions. If you would like to scan your 3rd QR code today, we'd love to hear a little bit more about what you've gained about today or any feedback. We're always trying to make sure that our events cater to your needs and what you're looking for. So by all means, if you'd like us to do something else, scan that QR code and let us know. And with that, I want to say a very big thank you to you all. We hope you have an amazing afternoon and enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.